Jim Morrison, lead singer of The Doors and counterculture icon, died under mysterious circumstances in July of 1971. Jim's untimely death, which happened less than a year after fellow counterculture contributors Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix, and less than 2 years after the death of Rolling Stone's Brian Jones, contributed to what is now known as the 27 Club, an infamous group of talented young artists who died at the age of 27 during the height of their careers. Today we'll be discussing Jim Morrison, his death, and the theories that followed.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Sarah,
And I'm Sydney.
and this week we have our first guest, Jake from Man the Helm.
Woo!
Yeah,
How's it going?
good.
Thank you for having me. I've been a fan of what you guys are doing, man. It's kind of awesome to check them out every week. Very awesome perspectives and great conspiracies and everything in between. So I've really been enjoying what you guys are doing. So thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Great. Thank you for being here and agreeing. Yeah, Man the Helm is a podcast and YouTube channel covering like all things music related. So we thought this would be a good topic to bring you in on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm ready to be briefed.
Nice. Do you know a lot about Jim Morrison before we start?
So this is actually probably the perfect thing to do because I am not a fan of the Doors and I know probably like the most general overview of the story. So it'll be kind of good to get like the overarching full story,
Yeah.
you know.
That makes sense. Yeah, I didn't know much before researching either. Like Sydney, you knew more, didn't you?
Yeah, I heard a podcast episode about it like 2 or 3 years ago, and the story kind of stuck with me. So for some reason, I'm very into it. Even though I'm not really a fan of the Doors either, but I just think it's like an interesting story.
Well, yeah, because there's just a lot of pieces to it, right? There's a lot of different angles you can approach it from my understanding. So I'm really excited to kind of to hear everything that we got to go over today.
Nice. Yeah, so I'll start with like the background information leading up to his death. So Jim Morrison was born on December 8th, 1943 in Florida to Clara and Lieutenant George Morrison. And he had a younger sister, Anne, and younger brother, Andrew. In 1947, when he was around 4, he said he witnessed a car accident in the desert where a truck overturned and Native Americans were like lying injured on the side of the road. And he recalled it like saying many people were scattered across the highway bleeding to death. But his parents said it wasn't that bad, but it did seem to make an impact on him at a young age. And his sister later said in a book that he enjoyed telling the story and exaggerating it, so she didn't even know like what was true. But he said this incident was the most formative event of his life, and he refers to it many times in his songs. So he and his siblings grew up as military brats since his dad was in the military and he had to move around a lot. So during elementary and middle school, he was in San Diego, Virginia, Texas, New Mexico, and then San Diego again. And he attended high school in California and finished in Virginia. Growing up, he read a lot and he was inspired by many philosophers and poets and was always reading something like offbeat. And his senior year English teacher said he wrote book reports on so many like weird titles that they thought like he was making it up. And so there was another teacher that looked them up in the Library of Congress to verify that the books were real. And like some of these books were on demonology. So it was interesting
Oh,
choice, yeah.
I've heard he had like an IQ of like 140. Like he was a
Yeah,
genius.
that's what I heard too.
well, I feel like it's one of those things based off of just what I've heard. It's like we're just adding to the mysticism of Jim Morrison. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? That's what it seems like. And having like the background very limited already of just like he likes to kind of over exaggerate
Oh
things,
yeah.
you know? I'm not trying to play the devil's advocate here, but I'm just giving my opinion is all.
Yeah. I mean, you could be a skeptic. I'm not sure. I don't know the theories. We'll get into them later, but I'm sure some of them are more esoteric than others,
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
but yeah, once he graduated high school, he lived with his grandparents in Florida and he attended St. Petersburg Junior College. In 1962, he transferred to Florida State University. And while he was there, he was arrested for disturbing the peace as well as petty larceny while drunk at a home football game on September 28th, 1963. So he was 19.
That was the day after my birthday.
Yeah.
Well, he also is the child of, somebody in the military, so the rebellious side of him is pretty strong, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, first time away.
One thing I heard about, like, his relationship with his dad was that, like, he was super defiant, and his dad would, like, make him stand in the living room and just scream at him in front of people and, like, berate him. So
Yeah.
he, like, has always had issues with, like, authority figures.
Yeah, that's what I heard too. Like his parents weren't like into like spanking, but he was I think it's called dressing down or dressing up in the military,
Hmm.
where you just scream and yell at them until you like break down.
Yeah.
So that's what his parents would do instead of like beating them, I guess. So,
And they would do it in front of his, like, friends. Like, when he
oh
had
wow.
friends over, yeah.
Yeah.
Or, well, his dad would.
Right. Yeah, I don't think his mom did. I think it was his dad. But yeah, soon after he was arrested, he transferred to the film program at UCLA, and he graduated in 1965 from UCLA's film school. He made several short films while he was at school, one of which was released to the public called First Love. And after he graduated, he lived a bohemian lifestyle in Venice Beach. He lived on the rooftop of a building where a former UCLA classmate was living. And during this time, he wrote the lyrics for many of the early Doors songs. And also during this time, according to a different UCLA classmate, Ray Manzarek, which ended up being the guitarist for the Doors, he said Morrison lived on beans and LSD.
Very bohemian.
Yeah. And he also broke off most contact with his family once he graduated college.
It's not a shocker.
And yeah. And he said later in an interview he did this because he didn't want to involve his family in his music career, but like they hadn't even taken off yet and he already cut him off, so
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the relationship was just on the rocks to begin with, so
yeah.
that's probably the main reason.
Yep. But Morrison and Manzarek were the first two members of the Doors, forming the group during that first summer out of college. And they had met as cinematography students, and Manzarek said he was impressed with Morrison's poetic lyrics, saying they were rock group material. Because Morrison didn't really have any like music background, just wrote lyrics, I guess.
Yeah, poetry and stuff was what he was really focusing on at that time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he read a lot of poetry growing up and like a lot of philosophical people.
Hmm.
So that influenced him a lot in his lyrics. And they later added a guitarist, Robbie Krieger, and drummer John Densmore. And all three musicians shared a common interest in the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's meditation practices, attending scheduled classes, but Morrison was not a part of these.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of, I think, too structured for him, maybe.
Or maybe it was like the hip thing at the time, and he didn't
Yeah.
want to be part of the cool crowd.
Yeah, he needs to be ahead of them.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Just eating beans and LSD.
Yep. Yeah, he doesn't have time to go to a scheduled yoga.
And before all that, like, LSD stuff, he was, like, a conservative, like, clean-cut guy, and then all of a sudden just, like, over a summer became this, like, hippie vagabond.
Yeah.
'Twas the time, though.
Yeah.
He was inspired to name the band after Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, which is a reference to unlocking the doors of perception through psychedelic drug use. In June 1966, the Doors were the opening act at Whiskey A Go Go in the last week of residency of Van Morrison's band, Them. So Jim Morrison learned a lot from Van during that week for developing his stage performance. And on the final night, the two bands jammed together to Gloria. And later, Van described Jim as being really raw, and he said he knew what he was doing and could do it very well. In November 1966, the Doors produced a promotional film for their first single release, and then the Doors achieved national recognition in 1967 after signing with Elektra Records. And their single Light My Fire spent 3 weeks at #1 on the chart in July and August of that year, which also during that year they opened for Simon and Garfunkel, and they also played at a high school, so it was very different to be the #1 for 3 weeks.
I was about to say that's a very wide range of gigs right there.
Yeah,
High school with then followed by Simon and Garfunkel, or vice versa.
yeah. And then signing with a record deal, so.
Right.
Yeah, and after this, like pretty quickly after this, they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, and they were requested to play People Are Strange and Light My Fire, but the show insisted they change the lyrics to the song Light My Fire from Girl, We Couldn't Get Much Higher to Girl, We Couldn't Get Much Better, since the original was perceived as related to drugs.
Can't have that.
Yeah. But after giving reluctant assurances to the producer that the lyrics would be changed, Morrison angrily told the band he wasn't changing a single word, and they sang the songs with the original lyrics.
Fight the power, man.
Yeah.
It was really controversial.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was. Yeah, and after Sullivan was unhappy and refused to shake hands with any of the band members, and he had a producer tell the band they would never appear on his show again, which Morrison replied saying, "We just did the Sullivan Show." By the release of their second album, Strange Days, the Doors had become one of the most popular rock bands in the U.S. In late summer 1967, photographer Joel Brodsky took a series of black and white photos of a shirtless Morrison in a photo shoot known as the Young Lion photo session. And these photos are thought to be the most iconic images of Jim Morrison and are used as covers for albums, books, and other memorabilia.
Fun fact about that picture, it was a school project of mine when I was in photography class to recreate that photo with a friend of mine.
Oh, really?
That's how iconic it is. Some random kid from Indiana decided to recreate it too.
Nice.
Like when I was growing up, there was this radio billboard that had his picture on it, like that picture. But the other side was like a religious thing, and it had the cross like sticking up above, so it was like a cross over his head. I think that was the first I ever heard of Jim Morrison.
Over his head, that's awesome.
It was there for like 20 years. Like it's probably still there.
They never noticed?
I don't know, but I loved it.
Yeah. That's cool. In late 1967, during a concert in Connecticut, Morrison was arrested on stage that added further mystique and emphasized his rebellious image. Prior to the show, a police officer found Morrison and a woman in the showers backstage, and the police officer didn't recognize Morrison, so he ordered him to leave, which Morrison replied with, "Eat me." He was then maced by the officer, and the show was delayed. And once he went on stage, he told an obscenity-filled version of the incident, which police then arrested him for indecency and public obscenity, but the charges were later dropped. So Morrison was the first rock performer to be arrested on stage.
And this was like really aggressive. Like he was like calling them little piggies and something about like a man and a little blue hat. Like it was really like it was bad. Like he was definitely inciting a riot.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it was really bad, but funny probably.
Yeah, I'm sure. I would have been so into it.
I was about to say, I'm sure the people there were having a blast.
Yeah. In 1968, the Doors released their third album, and on July 5th, they performed at the Hollywood Bowl. September 6th and 7th, the Doors played in Europe for the first time with 4 performances at the Roundhouse in London. And around this time, Morrison began to show up for recording sessions drunk.